Scarlett. Rowan didn't stumble. CEOs don't stumble. They stride, they command, they conquer. But tonight, as Chicago's elite toasted her latest billion-dollar merger, her champagne glass tilted just slightly too far. Her Louboutins caught on marble she'd walked 1,000 times, and for one terrible moment, the most powerful woman in the room nearly fell. Everyone saw. No one moved. Except Evan Carter, the quiet man by the water station, the single father who'd buried his wife because of someone else's drunken decision, who knew exactly what happened when people looked away from things that mattered. Before we begin, I invite you to follow this story to the very end. If you enjoy it, please hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The grand ballroom of the Millennium Tower never failed to impress, even for those who'd seen it dozens of times. Crystal chandeliers the size of compact cars hung from vaulted ceilings, casting prismatic light across 500 of Chicago's most influential people. The marble floors gleamed like still water, reflecting designer gowns and custom tuxedos that cost more than most people's cars. At the center of it all, commanding attention without demanding it, stood Scarlett Rowan. At 36, Scarlett had built Rowan Industries from a modest inheritance into a multi-billion-dollar empire spanning tech, real estate, and venture capital. Tonight's gala celebrated her latest acquisition, a struggling manufacturing company she'd transformed into a profitable enterprise while saving 800 jobs. The press loved the narrative, the ice queen with a heart. Her competitors knew better. Scarlett Rowan didn't make moves based on sentiment. She made moves that won. Her gown was the color of arterial blood, custom Valentino that hugged every calculated curve before flowing behind her like liquid fire. Her dark hair was swept into an elegant twist that showcased diamond earrings worth more than a house. She moved through the crowd like a red comet, trailing conversations and carefully managed laughter. CEOs straightened their spines when she approached. Board members rehearsed their pitches. Everyone wanted a moment of her time, a fraction of her attention, a sliver of her approval. Everyone except Evan Carter. He stood near the beverage station at the room's edge, nursing his third glass of water and checking his watch for the fourth time in 10 minutes. The tuxedo he wore was rented, though he'd been careful to choose one that fit well enough not to broadcast that fact. His shoes were his own, good leather, well-maintained, but not the Italian craftsmanship that surrounded him. At 32, Evan had the kind of face people forgot 5 minutes after meeting him. Pleasant, unremarkable, the kind of quiet competence that blended into backgrounds at events like this. He preferred it that way. Water? Really? The voice belonged to Marcus Chen, one of Evan's colleagues from the data analytics department. Marcus had loosened his bow tie and was working on what appeared to be his fifth cocktail. It's an open bar, man. Company's paying. Live a little. I'm good, Evan replied, offering a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. Suit yourself. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder hard enough to slosh Evan's water. Just seems like a waste, you know? How often do guys like us get invited to something like this? Never, Evan thought. We get invited never. We get obligated. The truth was more complicated than that, but not by much. Rowan Industries employed over 3,000 people across its various holdings. The annual gala was mandatory for senior leadership and strongly encouraged for select high performers from each division. Evan's inclusion had nothing to do with his personality and everything to do with the algorithm he'd developed that had saved the company approximately $14 million in operational inefficiencies over the past fiscal year. He'd been given a gold-embossed invitation, a rental tuxedo allowance, and the clear expectation that he'd show his face, smile appropriately, and demonstrate gratitude for the opportunity to breathe the same air as the executive class. Declining wasn't technically impossible, but it was the kind of career-limiting decision that a single father couldn't afford to make. So Evan had arranged for his sister-in-law Monica to stay with his daughter Addison, had put on the uncomfortable shoes and even more uncomfortable smile, and had shown up to play his part in Scarlett Rowan's carefully orchestrated theater of success. He checked his watch again. 9:47. He'd promised Addison he'd be home by midnight to check on her, even though she insisted she was practically a teenager, at 11 years old, and didn't need checking on. The memory of her eye roll made him smile. A real one this time. "Excuse me, could I get a glass of water, please?" The woman's voice was polite but carried the subtle edge of someone used to being heard the first time. Evan stepped aside automatically, making room at the beverage station. "Of course, I didn't mean to—" He stopped mid-apology when he realized who he was talking to. Scarlett Rowan stood less than 3 feet away, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something expensive that reminded him of night-blooming flowers. Up close, she was somehow both more and less than her public image. The photos didn't capture the sharp intelligence in her dark eyes, but they also didn't show the fine lines of exhaustion at their corners or the way her smile looked like something she'd practiced until it became automatic. "No apology necessary," she said, reaching past him for a glass. Her hand was steady as she filled it from the pitcher, ice cubes clinking softly. "You're Evan Carter, aren't you? Data analytics?" The fact that she knew his name shouldn't have surprised him. Scarlett Rowan was famous for her memory, for knowing every employee's contribution to her empire. But surprise flickered through him anyway, quickly suppressed. "Yes, ma'am. I am." Her lips quirked at the ma'am, but she didn't correct him. "Your efficiency algorithm is elegant work. My CFO hasn't stopped talking about it for 3 months." "Thank you. I'm glad it's been useful." "Useful." She repeated the word like she was tasting it, finding it insufficient. "It's been remarkable. You have a gift for seeing patterns other people miss." Evan had no idea how to respond to that, so he defaulted to the safest option. "I appreciate the recognition." Scarlett studied him for a moment longer than was comfortable, her eyes searching his face for something he couldn't identify. Then she raised her water glass slightly, a tiny salute. "Enjoy your evening, Mr. Carter." "You too, Ms. Rowan." She glided back into the crowd, red gown trailing, and within seconds was absorbed into a cluster of executives competing for her attention. Evan released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Dude." Marcus had materialized at his elbow again, eyes wide. "Did Scarlett Rowan just talk to you? Like actual conversation?" "Briefly." "About what?" "Work." "Work?" Marcus shook his head in disbelief. "The Ice Queen knows your name, and you're talking about work like you're discussing the weather. You know how many guys in this room would kill for 5 seconds of her attention?" Evan did know. He could see them circling her like well-dressed sharks, each one angling for position, for advantage, for the chance to be remembered as someone who mattered. Scarlett handled them all with the same practiced grace, her smile never wavering, her posture never relaxing. "She's just doing her job," Evan said quietly. "Making people feel valued. It's good management." "If you say so," Marcus drained his drink. "I'm getting another. You sure you don't want anything stronger?" "I'm sure." As Marcus wandered off, Evan found his attention drifting back to Scarlett. She'd moved to the center of the ballroom now, surrounded by a new constellation of executives and board members. Someone handed her a champagne flute. She took it with a smile, raised it in a toast to something someone said, and drank. That was her 3rd glass since Evan had arrived. He'd noticed because he was trained to notice patterns, to see data in the world around him. 3 glasses in just under 2 hours. Not excessive by most standards, especially at an event like this where alcohol flowed as freely as conversation. But there was something about the way she drank, not savoring, not socializing, but steadying, that made him pay attention. Maybe he was projecting. Maybe he saw problems where none existed because he'd learned to be hypervigilant about this particular problem. Maybe... His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, grateful for the distraction. "Everything okay?" "You look stressed in my imagination." Monica's text was accompanied by a string of laughing emojis. "I'm fine," he typed back. "How's Addison?" "Asleep for the last hour. Didn't even finish her movie. I'm binging reality TV and eating your good ice cream." "That's the cheap ice cream. Your good ice cream." Evan smiled despite himself, typed out, "See you by midnight," and pocketed his phone. When he looked up, Scarlett had moved again. She was near the silent auction tables now, examining a painting with an older gentleman Evan recognized as the owner of a major Chicago newspaper. Her champagne glass was empty. Someone, a circling waiter or an attentive executive, had already replaced it with a full one. 4th glass. The evening was far from over. The next hour passed in the peculiar slow-motion way of mandatory social events. Evan made appropriate small talk with people whose names he'd forget by morning. He admired the auction items he had no intention of bidding on: a week in Tuscany, courtside Bulls tickets, a vintage wine collection. He smiled and nodded and checked his watch and reminded himself that this was part of the job, that his presence here mattered in ways he couldn't quantify but understood instinctively. And he watched Scarlett Rowan. Not obviously. Not in the way others watched her, with hunger or envy or calculation. He watched the way he'd learned to watch for signs of danger, for the subtle shifts that indicated when something was going wrong before it became catastrophic. Glass 5 came around 11:15. Glass 6 appeared shortly after. By 11:40, Scarlett's movements had changed in ways so subtle that most people wouldn't notice. Her gestures were slightly wider, her laugh slightly louder, her transitions between conversation groups slightly less smooth. She was still in control, still commanding the room, still the center of gravity everyone orbited, but the control was requiring more effort. Final boarding call, passengers. Marcus had returned, significantly more unsteady than before. Some of us are heading to that place on Rush Street, the one with the... He made a vague gesture that could have meant anything. You coming? I need to get home. Man, you're 23 going on 50. When's the last time you actually went out? 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days ago, the night before Sarah died. I've got responsibilities, Evan said simply. Yeah, the daughter. I get it. Marcus's tone suggested he didn't get it at all. Not really. But she's got a sitter, right? You could live a little, have some fun. Fun. Evan barely remembered what that word meant. His life was structured around routines and schedules and making sure Addison had everything she needed. Fun was watching her soccer games, reading bedtime stories that she was almost too old for but still requested. Fun was her laugh, her terrible jokes, her absolute certainty that her dad would always be there when she needed him. Fun was not this: expensive alcohol and expensive people playing expensive games with each other's futures. You go ahead, Evan said. I'll see you Monday. Marcus shrugged and stumbled off to join the other after-party pilgrims. Evan checked his watch. 11:53. He'd more than fulfilled his obligation. Time to collect his coat, and the crash wasn't loud, but it was distinct enough to cut through the ambient noise of the ballroom. Near the main doors, Scarlett Rowan had collided with a waiter carrying a tray of champagne flutes. Glass exploded across marble, liquid spreading in golden pools that reflected chandelier light. I'm so sorry, Scarlett was saying, but her words had the careful precision of someone concentrating very hard on enunciation. That was entirely my fault. I wasn't watching where... Let me help you clean... No need, ma'am, please, I've got it. The waiter was already kneeling, gathering shards with practiced efficiency. A security guard materialized, as did one of the venue managers, and within seconds they'd formed a protective barrier around both the mess and Scarlett, ushering people away with apologetic smiles. The crowd absorbed the moment and moved on. Someone made a joke about champagne waterfall art installations. Laughter rippled and faded. The orchestra, which had paused for barely a heartbeat, resumed playing. Everything returned to normal so quickly it was like the incident had never happened, except Scarlett wasn't where she'd been. Evan scanned the crowd and found her near the coat check, leaning slightly against the marble column, her face turned away from the remaining guests. Her shoulders were rigid with the kind of tension that comes from holding yourself together through sheer force of will. No one approached her. Not the executives who'd been competing for her attention all evening, not the board members who'd hung on her every word, not any of the 500 people who would have crawled across broken glass for a chance at a private moment with Scarlett Rowan. They all looked away. Evan understood the calculus instantly. Acknowledging her moment of weakness, her loss of control, however minor, felt dangerous. In the world these people inhabited, power was absolute or it was nothing. Showing concern would be acknowledging the crack in the facade, and no one wanted to be the one who noticed when the queen was vulnerable. So they pretended not to see. They continued their conversations and their networking and their careful social dances, and they left Scarlett Rowan alone in a room full of people. Evan's feet were moving before his brain fully processed the decision. He crossed the ballroom with the same unremarkable efficiency he brought to everything, just another forgettable face in the crowd. When he reached Scarlett, she was pressing her fingers against her temples, eyes closed. "Miss Rowan?" His voice was quiet, giving her the option to ignore him if she wanted. "Are you all right?" Her eyes opened, focusing on him with some difficulty. Recognition flickered. "Mr. Carter, the pattern finder." "I was just leaving. Can I help you find your driver?" "Driver." She said it like the word was in a foreign language. "I sent him home, hours ago. I thought—" She gestured vaguely at the ballroom behind them. "Someone would, but everyone still—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Everyone was still networking, still posturing, still playing the game, and she was the prize they all wanted, but no one wanted to see as human enough to need help. "Let me drive you home," Evan offered. "You don't have to do that." "I know." Scarlett studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes trying to focus, trying to assess his motives. Evan kept his expression neutral, patient. He wasn't angling for anything, wasn't trying to leverage this moment into opportunity. He was just a man who recognized a dangerous situation and couldn't walk away from it. Maybe she saw that. Maybe she was just tired of standing. Either way, she nodded once. "Okay." Getting Scarlett's coat took 3 minutes of polite insistence with a coat check attendant who seemed convinced that Ms. Rowan couldn't possibly be leaving with someone like Evan. Getting through the ballroom without attracting attention took longer. People kept trying to intercept them, to pull Scarlett into one more conversation, one more pitch, one more moment of her time. "Gentlemen, I'm afraid I have an early morning," Scarlett said smoothly, her public smile back in place even as she swayed slightly. "We'll have to continue this on Monday." Evan kept his hand lightly on her elbow, not guiding but steadying, ready to catch her if her heels betrayed her again. They made it to the elevators without incident, and as the golden doors slid closed, cutting them off from the ballroom's glittering chaos, Scarlett sagged against the wall. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You're welcome." The elevator descended in silence, punctuated only by the soft ping of passing floors. Evan watched the numbers count down and tried not to think about how surreal this was. Scarlett Rowan in her blood-red gown, leaning against mirrored walls like any other exhausted person at the end of a long night, and him in his rented tuxedo, about to drive the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company home in his 7-year-old Honda Civic. The parking garage was 3 levels below ground, concrete and fluorescent lights that seemed aggressively bright after the soft ambiance of the ballroom. Evan's car looked exactly as he'd expected, embarrassingly ordinary next to the Teslas and BMWs, and that one Bentley that probably cost more than he'd earn in a lifetime. He unlocked the passenger door first, holding it open while Scarlett gathered her gown and folded herself into the seat with the careful concentration of someone doing something much more complicated than sitting down. Then he circled to the driver's side, started the engine, and pulled out into Chicago's midnight streets. For the first few minutes, neither of them spoke. Scarlett had her eyes closed, head tilted back against the headrest. Evan focused on driving, on the familiar rhythms of turn signals and traffic lights, and the city's late-night pulse. Then Scarlett's voice broke the silence. "I wasn't always like this." Evan glanced at her but said nothing, giving her space to continue or not. "When I started the company, I worked 18-hour days, lived on coffee and takeout and ambition. I didn't drink, didn't have time for it." Her laugh was bitter. "Now I have all the time in the world and nothing but champagne to fill it with." "You could stop," Evan said quietly. "The champagne, I mean." "Could I?" She opened her eyes, turning to look at him. "Do you know what happens in my world if you show weakness? If you admit you might need help? They circle like sharks. Board members start questioning your judgment. Competitors smell blood. You think you can build an empire and then just ask for a timeout?" Evan thought about the waiter on his knees gathering broken glass, the executives who'd looked away, the crowd that had pretended not to notice. "The people in that ballroom tonight," he said carefully, "they weren't looking away because they respect your strength. They were looking away because they're afraid of your weakness, and you're giving them exactly what they want, a reason to doubt you." Scarlett was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, some of the defensive edge gone. "Why didn't you look away?" "I've seen what happens when people do." "What does that mean?" Evan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He'd spent 3 years avoiding this conversation, avoiding even thinking about it in any detail that might crack open the careful compartmentalization that kept him functional. But something about the darkness of the car, the lateness of the hour, the strange intimacy of this moment made the words come easier. "My wife died 3 years ago," he said, "hit by a drunk driver. 22-year-old kid who'd had too much at a party. His friends saw him get in his car, saw that he was impaired, and they looked away because it was easier than making it their problem. Sarah was driving home from a late shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. She never saw him coming." The silence that followed felt heavy, full of the weight of things that couldn't be unsaid. "Evan, I'm so sorry." "I don't tell you this to make you feel guilty," Evan said. "I tell you because I learned something that night, not from losing Sarah, but from what came after. All the people at the funeral who said they'd noticed the warning signs but hadn't wanted to interfere. Her supervisor who'd noticed she was exhausted but hadn't insisted she go home earlier. The kid's friends who'd let him drive because confronting him would have been awkward. Everyone who looked away from something that mattered because acknowledging it was uncomfortable." He pulled up to a stoplight, red reflecting off the windshield. "I can't fix the world. Can't make people stop drinking. Can't make everyone's problems my responsibility. But when I see someone in a position where looking away might lead to harm, to them or to someone else, I can't do it. I won't be the person who looked away." Scarlett didn't respond immediately. When the light turned green and Evan accelerated, she finally spoke, her voice rough. "Your daughter. How old?" 11. "Addison, she's—" He paused, searching for words adequate to describe his daughter and finding them all insufficient. "She's everything." "Does she know? About her mother?" "She was 8 when it happened. She remembers." Evan's throat tightened. "She remembers too much and not enough, if that makes sense. She remembers Sarah reading to her, making breakfast, singing off key in the car, but she's losing the details. The exact sound of her voice, the specific way she smiled, and I can see her trying to hold on to those memories, and I can see them slipping away, and there's nothing I can do about it." "You're doing everything you can," Scarlett said softly, "being there for her. That matters more than you know." "I hope so." They drove in silence for another few minutes, the city passing by in strips of light and shadow. Then Scarlett gave him her address, a high-rise building on the Gold Coast that Evan recognized from architectural magazines Addison had shown him. The kind of place where the doormen wore uniforms and the lobby had its own art collection. He pulled up to the entrance, put the car in park, and turned to look at Scarlett. In the dim light of the car's interior, she looked younger somehow, or maybe just more human. The armor of her public persona had fallen away, leaving someone who was tired and lonely and scared in ways she probably never admitted. "Thank you," she said again, "for seeing me, for not looking away. Will you be all right? Getting upstairs, I mean?" "I'll be fine." She reached for the door handle, then paused. "The water. At the beverage station. That's all you were drinking tonight, wasn't it?" "Yes." "Because of what happened. To your wife. Because of what I saw it do to my daughter. The grief was bad enough. I couldn't add my own problems to her burden." He met her eyes. "I haven't had a drink since the night before Sarah died. Not because I was an alcoholic, but because I couldn't trust myself not to become one. Couldn't risk Addison losing both parents to the same thing." Scarlett nodded slowly, processing this. "That's why you noticed. Tonight. Why you paid attention when no one else did." "Yes." "I'm not an alcoholic," she said, but it sounded like she was trying to convince herself as much as him. "I didn't say you were. But you're using alcohol to cope with something. And coping isn't the same as solving. Eventually, the thing you're coping with breaks through anyway, and then you have 2 problems instead of 1. When did you become so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just familiar with the cost of looking away." Scarlett opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air. The doorman was approaching, his expression carefully neutral despite the hour and the state of his most famous resident. Before closing the door, Scarlett leaned back down. "Will I see you on Monday? At the office?" "I'll be there." "Good." She straightened, then added, "And Evan, what you did tonight, driving me home, talking to me like a person instead of a position, I won't forget it." Before Before Evan could respond, she'd turned and was walking toward the building entrance with the careful dignity of someone determined not to stumble. The doorman held the door, murmured something respectful, and they both disappeared into the building's golden interior. Evan sat in his car for a moment longer, hands still on the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. Then he checked the dashboard clock, 12:17, and pulled away from the curb. He was late getting home, but not terribly so. Monica would understand. The drive back to his neighborhood took him from the Gold Coast's pristine streets to more modest surroundings, where buildings were shorter and older and the cars parked along the curbs were more practical than prestigious. His building was a 3-story walk-up that had probably been nice in the 1940s and was now just clean and affordable. He parked in his assigned spot, climbed the stairs to the second floor, and unlocked his apartment as quietly as possible. Monica was on the couch, laptop open, some reality show playing on mute. She looked up when he entered, eyebrows rising at the tuxedo. Well, how was the fancy party?" "Long," Evan said, shrugging out of the jacket. "Thanks for staying." "Anytime." Addison was an angel, as always. Went to bed without protest at 9:30. "Did she finish her homework?" "Math and English both. She wanted me to tell you she needs new cleats for soccer. Apparently her current ones are tragically outdated, and she'll die of embarrassment if she has to wear them to practice again." Evan smiled tiredly. "Noted. I'll take her shopping this weekend." Monica closed her laptop, studying him. "You okay? You look, I don't know, like something happened. Just a weird night." "Weird how?" Evan considered how to answer that, how to explain that he'd spent the last hour of his evening driving Chicago's most powerful CEO home and having a conversation about loss and loneliness and the ways people learn to cope with both. How to describe the strange moment of connection he'd felt with someone who existed in a completely different world from his. "Weird, like I remembered why I don't drink at company parties," he finally said. Monica laughed. "Fair enough. Well, I'm going to head home before Josh starts texting about where I am. You know how he gets." She grabbed her coat and bag, then paused at the door. "Seriously though, Evan, if you ever want to talk about anything, Sarah or work or just life, I'm here." "I know, thank you." After Monica left, Evan changed out of the tuxedo and into comfortable clothes, moving quietly through his small apartment. He checked on Addison, opening her door just enough to see her curled up under her constellation-patterned comforter, one arm wrapped around the stuffed elephant Sarah had given her for her 5th birthday. Her breathing was deep and even, her face peaceful in sleep. Evan stood there for a long moment, watching his daughter and feeling the familiar tightness in his chest that came from loving someone so much it physically hurt. She was everything good that remained from his life with Sarah. Every laugh, every accomplishment, every terrible joke and eye roll and stubborn insistence on independence, it was all proof that something beautiful could survive even the worst tragedy. He closed her door quietly and went to his own room, but he didn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Scarlett Rowan in her red gown, about the loneliness in her eyes, about the way everyone had looked away when she stumbled. He thought about the cost of power and the price of being human in a world that demanded perfection. He thought about coping mechanisms and the stories people told themselves to justify their choices. He thought about his own choice, made 3 years ago in a hospital waiting room while his daughter sobbed in his arms, to never let alcohol become his solution to unbearable pain. And he thought about Monday morning, when he'd return to his desk and his algorithms and his quiet, unremarkable existence, and Scarlett Rowan would return to her corner office and her board meetings and her empire. The strange intimacy of tonight would fade into the normal distance between a CEO and a mid-level employee. Everything would return to how it was supposed to be. Except that wasn't how things worked, Evan realized as sleep finally began to pull him under. Patterns, once disrupted, never returned to their exact original form. Something had shifted tonight, some variable had changed, and he had no algorithm to predict where the new pattern might lead. But he'd learned to trust his instincts about these things, about the subtle shifts that indicated when something fundamental was changing. And his instincts told him that what had happened tonight, the moment when he'd chosen not to look away, was going to matter in ways he couldn't yet see. Outside his window, Chicago continued its endless movement, Millions of individual lives intersecting and diverging in patterns too complex for any algorithm to fully capture. Somewhere in the city, in a penthouse apartment with a view of the lake, Scarlett Rowan was probably lying awake as well, thinking about the same moment from a different angle, wondering what it meant that someone had finally seen her not as a position or a prize, but as a person who needed help. The night didn't offer any answers, but sometimes, Evan had learned, asking the right questions was enough to start changing the pattern, and tomorrow would reveal whether that change was for better or worse. For now, though, there was just this: the quiet apartment, his daughter sleeping safely down the hall, and the strange, uncertain knowledge that he'd done something that mattered, even if he couldn't yet see the full shape of what he'd set in motion. That would have to be enough. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray drizzle that made Chicago feel like it was wrapped in wet newspaper. Evan dropped Addison at school. She was still campaigning for the new cleats, making increasingly dramatic arguments about her social survival, and drove to the Rowan Industries tower with the radio playing soft jazz that didn't quite mask his nervous energy. He told himself the nervousness was ridiculous. Nothing had changed. He'd helped someone who needed help, had a meaningful conversation, and that was the end of it. Scarlett Rowan had probably woken up Sunday morning with a headache and vague embarrassment, had maybe sent a polite thank you email that some assistant had drafted, and had already moved on to the 1,000 other concerns that filled a CEO's calendar. The lobby of Rowan Industries was its usual Monday chaos. Security badges beeping, coffee cups clutched like lifelines, the low hum of people psyching themselves up for another week. Evan badged in, took the elevator to the 14th floor where data analytics lived in a warren of cubicles and conference rooms, and settled into his desk with the comforting routine of logging in, checking emails, reviewing the weekend's automated reports. Nothing from Scarlett. Of course not. What had he expected? He was 3 emails deep into a thread about database optimization when his desk phone rang. The internal number on the display made his stomach drop. Extension 5000. Executive floor. He stared at it for 2 more rings before answering. "This is Evan Carter." "Mr. Carter, please hold for Ms. Rowan." The assistant's voice was professionally pleasant, giving him no time to respond before classical music filled the line. Evan's mind raced through possibilities, each one more uncomfortable than the last. Maybe she was calling to politely establish boundaries, to make clear that Friday night's vulnerability was an aberration that shouldn't be mentioned again. Maybe she'd reconsidered his comments in the car, decided they were presumptuous. Maybe... "Evan?" Scarlett's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts, clear and composed. "Good morning. Do you have a moment?" "Of course, Ms. Rowan." "Could you come up to my office? There's something I'd like to discuss." The classical music returned before he could ask what. Evan set down the phone and stared at his monitor for a solid 10 seconds, trying to calibrate his reaction. Around him, the usual Monday morning sounds continued. Keyboards clicking, someone laughing at a joke, the coffee maker gurgling in the break room. Normal life, carrying on while his own veered into unexpected territory. Marcus rolled his chair over from the adjacent cubicle, eyebrows raised. "Was that who I think it was?" "I need to go upstairs for a minute." "Upstairs like executive floor upstairs?" "Yes." "Dude." Marcus's eyes went wide. "What did you do?" "I have no idea." The executive floor occupied the entire 42nd story of the tower and was designed to remind visitors that they had ascended to rarefied air. The elevator opened onto a reception area with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, modern art that probably cost more than Evan's annual salary, and a receptionist who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. "Evan Carter," he told her. "Ms. Rowan is expecting me." She smiled with professional warmth that didn't quite reach her eyes, made a brief call, then gestured toward the corridor. "Third door on the left. Ms. Rowan's assistant will meet you." The assistant was a woman in her 50s named Patricia, who Evan had encountered once before during his initial presentation of the efficiency algorithm. She had the kind of competent energy that suggested she ran half the company while Scarlett ran the other half. "Mr. Carter, good to see you again." She shook his hand firmly. "Ms. Rowan is just finishing a call. Can I get you coffee? Water?" "Water would be great, thank you." Patricia led him to a small sitting area outside Scarlett's office. leather chairs, more expensive art, a view that made Chicago look like an architect's model. She returned with water in actual glass, not paper cups, and Evan sipped it while trying not to think about the fact that he was sitting outside the CEO's office on a Monday morning for reasons he couldn't begin to guess. The door opened and a man in an expensive suit emerged, looking pleased with himself. Patricia caught Evan's eye and nodded. "You can go in now." Scarlett's office was exactly what he'd expected and nothing like it at the same time. Yes, there was the massive desk and the leather chairs and the panoramic windows, but there were also personal touches that surprised him. A small jade plant on the windowsill, a framed photograph of what looked like a much younger Scarlett with an older woman, possibly her mother. Books lined one wall, not just business texts, but novels, poetry, philosophy. Scarlett stood by the windows, silhouetted against the gray morning light. She'd traded Friday's red gown for a charcoal suit that was somehow both severe and elegant. When she turned to face him, her expression was controlled but not cold. "Evan, thank you for coming up." "Of course. Please sit." She gestured to the chairs opposite her desk, then took her own seat, creating a distance that felt simultaneously professional and intentional. For a moment, she simply looked at him, and Evan had the unsettling sense that she was seeing through all his carefully maintained ordinariness to something underneath. "I owe you an apology," she said finally. That was not what he'd expected. "You don't... Please, let me finish." She laced her fingers together on the desk, a gesture that looked almost like prayer. "Friday night, I put you in an uncomfortable position. You were at a company event, and I wasn't at my best. You felt obligated to help because of the power dynamics between us, and that wasn't fair to you." "Miss Rowan, I didn't feel obligated. I offered because I wanted to help." "Did you? Or did you offer because saying no to your CEO would have felt impossible?" Evan considered this carefully. The truth was complicated, layered with motivations he hadn't fully examined himself. "I offered because I saw someone who needed help, and everyone else was looking away. The fact that you're my CEO made it more complicated, but it didn't change the fundamental situation." Scarlett studied him for a long moment. "In the car, you told me about your wife, about the drunk driver. That can't have been easy." "It wasn't, but it felt important that you understand why I noticed, why I couldn't look away. And the things you said about coping versus solving, about alcohol being a problem I was creating rather than a solution I was finding." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "I've thought about that conversation quite a bit over the weekend." And you were right. The admission seemed to cost her something. "I've been drinking more over the past year, not enough to interfere with work, or so I told myself. Just enough to make the evenings more tolerable, the loneliness less sharp. But Friday night I crossed a line I swore I'd never cross. I lost control in public, and if you hadn't been there..." She stopped, shook her head. "I've spent 3 days thinking about what could have happened, how much worse it could have been." Evan waited, sensing there was more she needed to say. "I called you up here to thank you properly, and to tell you that I've made an appointment with someone, a therapist who specializes in..." She waved her hand vaguely. "Executive stress and related issues. My first session is Wednesday." "That's good. That's really good." "I'm not an alcoholic," Scarlett said, and Evan heard the defensiveness creeping back into her voice. "I want to be clear about that, okay? But I've been using alcohol in ways that aren't healthy, and I've been ignoring that because admitting it felt like admitting weakness, and I can't afford..." She stopped herself. "No. That's the old thinking, isn't it? The thinking that led to Friday night. The truth is that ignoring problems doesn't make them go away. It just makes them worse." "Yes." Scarlett leaned back in her chair, some of the formal tension leaving her shoulders. "You have a gift for saying exactly enough, and not a word more. Do you know that? My daughter tells me I'm frustratingly calm in most situations." She's not wrong. A small smile crossed Scarlett's face, the first genuine one he'd seen from her that morning. "Tell me about her. Addison, right?" The invitation surprised him, but Evan found himself responding to it naturally. "She's 11. Smart, stubborn, completely certain she knows everything. She plays soccer, hates math homework, and has recently decided that her entire social status depends on having cleats that don't embarrass her. The trials of middle school. I'm not ready for middle school. She keeps growing up and I keep wanting to freeze time. That's what good parents do, Scarlett said softly. Want to protect their children from time itself. Something in her tone made Evan ask, "Do you have kids?" "No. I always thought there would be time for that. After I built the company, after I proved myself, after I secured everything. But there's always another milestone, another goal, another reason to wait. And now I'm 36 and I've built this empire, but I come home to an empty penthouse and the only things waiting for me are emails and expensive wine." The honesty in the statement hung between them, vulnerable in a way that seemed to surprise Scarlett herself. She straightened slightly, as if remembering who and where she was. "I'm sorry. I didn't call you up here to unload my personal struggles." "It's okay," Evan said. "Friday night, you saw me as a person instead of just an employee. Seems fair that I return the courtesy." Scarlett's expression shifted, something warming in her eyes. "You're an interesting man, Evan Carter. Most people in your position would be angling for something right now. A promotion, a raise, leverage. But you're just sitting there, being honest. What would I leverage? The fact that you had a rough night? That you're human?" Evan shook his head. "That's not who I am." "No," Scarlett agreed quietly. "I suppose it isn't." For a moment, silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but full of things neither of them seemed quite ready to name. Then Scarlett's desk phone buzzed, and Patricia's voice came through the speaker. "Ms. Rowan, your 10 o'clock is here." "Thank you, Patricia. Please have them wait just a moment." Scarlett looked at Evan. "I should let you get back to work. But before you go, would you have lunch with me sometime this week? There's something else I'd like to discuss." "Of course." "Thursday? My calendar is relatively clear then." "Thursday works." "Good." She stood and Evan did the same. "And Evan, what we discussed this morning about the therapy, about the drinking, I'd appreciate if that stayed between us." "Absolutely." "Thank you." She walked him to the door, then added, "Oh, and Evan, when we have lunch Thursday, I'm going to tell you about a project I'm considering. One where your particular talents might be extremely valuable. But I wanted to wait until we'd had this conversation first, until I'd made things right from Friday night." Evan nodded, shook her offered hand, and left the office with more questions than answers. Patricia gave him a knowing smile as he passed, like she'd seen this scene play out before with other employees, though Evan suspected the context was usually quite different. The elevator ride down felt longer than the ride up, giving him time to process the strangeness of the morning. Scarlett Rowan had apologized to him, had shared personal struggles, had invited him to lunch to discuss some mysterious project. It all felt surreal, like he'd stepped sideways into an alternate version of his life, where the CEO of his company treated him as something other than a useful but forgettable resource. Back at his desk, Marcus pounced immediately. "Well, what happened? Did you get promoted? Fired? Transferred to the secret underground laboratory we all pretend doesn't exist?" "I got thanked." "Thanked? For what?" "For helping with something on Friday." Marcus waited for more details, and when none came, he shook his head. "You're killing me with the mystery, man. Fine, keep your secrets. But if you suddenly show up with a corner office next week, I'm going to have questions." Evan returned to his emails, to the comfortable routine of data and patterns and problems he could solve with logic. But part of his mind stayed on that 42nd floor, on the woman who ruled an empire but couldn't make her evenings less lonely, on the unexpected vulnerability she'd shown him, and the trust implicit in that vulnerability. The rest of the week passed in a rhythm that was almost normal except for the undercurrent of anticipation. Evan did his work, picked up Addison from school, attended her soccer practice where she dramatically showcased her tragic cleats for his benefit, made dinner, helped with homework, maintained the careful routines that structured their lives. On Tuesday evening, while Addison was absorbed in a video call with her friend Maya, something about a school project that seemed to involve more giggling than actual work, Evan found himself thinking about Scarlett's comment about coming home to an empty penthouse. He looked around his small, cluttered apartment with its mismatched furniture and Addison's art projects covering the fridge and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost hurt. He wasn't alone. Every day he came home to evidence of life being lived, shoes kicked off by the door, backpack dumped on the couch, the lingering smell of whatever breakfast Addison had convinced him to make. The apartment was small and the furniture was cheap and the walls were thin enough that he could hear the neighbor's television. But it was full of the things that mattered. Wednesday came and went. Evan wondered if Scarlett had followed through with the therapy appointment, but didn't have any way to know, and certainly wasn't going to ask. It wasn't his business. He'd offered perspective, she'd taken it, and what she did with that perspective was her choice. Thursday morning, Patricia called his extension at 11:30. Mr. Carter, Ms. Rowan asked me to let you know that lunch will be at 12:30 in her office. I'll have it brought up, so no need to go anywhere. Thank you. And Mr. Carter, Ms. Rowan prefers punctuality. Understood. At 12:25, Evan took the elevator back up to the 42nd floor, was greeted by Patricia with the same professional warmth, and was shown into Scarlett's office where a small table had been set up by the windows. Two place settings, simple but elegant, and the view of Chicago spread out below like a promise. Scarlett was on a phone call when he arrived, pacing by the windows with her back to the door. She gestured for him to sit, held up one finger indicating she'd be just a moment, and continued her conversation. Jerry, I understand your concerns, but we've been over this. The timeline is aggressive because it needs to be. Our competitors aren't going to wait for us to feel comfortable. She listened, her free hand gesturing sharply. Then we'll need to reallocate resources. Pull from the Denver project if necessary. This takes priority. More listening. By Monday, I want the revised projections on my desk by Monday morning. She ended the call without pleasantries and turned to Evan with a slightly strained smile. Sorry about that. Crisis management is apparently my permanent state of existence. It's fine. Sit, please. She took the seat across from him as Patricia appeared with covered dishes, setting them down efficiently before disappearing again. Scarlett lifted the covers to reveal what looked like a very well-prepared chicken salad, fresh bread, and some kind of vegetable medley. I hope this is okay. I wasn't sure what you liked, so I went with something relatively safe. This is perfect. Thank you. They ate in silence for a few moments, and Evan noted that Scarlett had water in her glass. No wine, despite the fact that it was the kind of lunch where wine would have been standard. Small choice, but deliberate. How was your first therapy session? He asked, then immediately wondered if he'd overstepped. I'm sorry, that's probably too personal. No, it's... Scarlett set down her fork. It was difficult. Expensive and difficult, which seems fitting somehow. Dr. Morrison is very direct. She doesn't let me hide behind corporate speak or deflect with humor. She just keeps asking questions until I give her real answers. Sounds effective. Sounds exhausting, Scarlett corrected, but she was almost smiling. But yes, I suppose it is effective. We talked about stress management, about the drinking, about why I've structured my entire life around work at the expense of everything else. Apparently, I have avoidance patterns consistent with unprocessed grief. Her words, not mine. Evan waited, sensing she needed to work through this at her own pace. My mother died 4 years ago, Scarlett continued, her voice carefully level. Cancer. Very aggressive, very quick. She went from diagnosis to gone in 8 months. And I threw myself into the business. Worked 20-hour days, closed 3 major deals, expanded into 2 new markets. Proved I could keep building the empire even after losing the person who'd believed I could build it in the first place. She looked out the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Dr. Morrison thinks I've been running from that grief ever since, that the drinking is just the latest symptom of never actually stopping to process the loss. I'm sorry about your mother. Thank you. Scarlett turned back to him, and her eyes were slightly too bright. Anyway, that's what I'm working through. Understanding why I do the things I do. Why I surround myself with people but never let anyone get close. Why I've built this perfect life that feels completely hollow. It's not hollow, Evan said gently. You've built something remarkable. You employ thousands of people, create opportunities, solve problems. That matters. Does it? Because some days I wonder if I've just created a very expensive distraction from the fact that I'm terrified of being alone with my own thoughts. Evan recognized that kind of honesty, the kind that came from finally saying out loud the things you'd only thought in the darkest hours. After Sarah died, I had about 6 months where I couldn't be alone. Every quiet moment my brain would fill with worst-case scenarios. I'd imagine Addison getting sick, getting hurt, all the ways I could lose her too. Monica practically moved in because I couldn't handle the nights when Addison was asleep and I had nothing to do but think. How did you get through it? Therapy helped, time helped, but mostly... He paused, trying to articulate something he'd never quite put into words before. Mostly I realized that avoiding the grief didn't make it smaller. It just made it sharper, more likely to cut me when I wasn't expecting it. So I had to learn to sit with it, to let myself miss Sarah without trying to fix or escape that missing. And gradually, it got easier. Not better, exactly, but easier. Scarlett absorbed this, nodding slowly. Dr. Morrison said something similar, that grief isn't something you solve, it's something you integrate. That sounds right. They returned to their meal, but the atmosphere had shifted into something more comfortable. After a few minutes, Scarlett seemed to gather herself, straightening in her chair with the visible return of her CEO persona. So, I mentioned I wanted to discuss a project with you. You did. Over the past year, I've been quietly acquiring smaller companies, not for their market share, but for their data infrastructure. I'm building something new, an AI-driven analytics platform that could revolutionize how mid-sized companies optimize their operations. It's ambitious, potentially industry-disrupting, and absolutely dependent on having someone who understands both the technical architecture and the practical applications. She looked at him directly. I want you to lead the development team. Evan set down his fork carefully. Lead the team. You'd report directly to me, have full autonomy over the technical decisions, budget authority within reason, and profit sharing in the platform's success. It would mean longer hours, more responsibility, significantly more visibility within the company, but I think you're perfect for it. Why me? You have people with more experience, more credentials, more ambition? Scarlett smiled slightly. That's exactly why you. Everyone else I could choose for this would be using it as a stepping stone to the next opportunity. You're not playing career chess. You're not angling for power. You solve problems because they interest you, and you do it well because excellence matters to you. That's what this project needs. Evan's mind was racing. The opportunity was extraordinary, career-defining, financially significant, exactly the kind of advancement that people dreamed about. But it would also mean fundamental changes to his carefully balanced life. More hours at work meant less time with Addison. More visibility meant more pressure, more scrutiny, more chance of failure in ways that would affect her security. Can I think about it? He asked. Of course. Take the time you need. Scarlett paused. But I should mention, part of why I'm offering this to you specifically is because of last Friday. Not because I owe you, but because you demonstrated something that's rare in my world. Integrity without agenda. And I need someone on this project who I can trust completely. I appreciate that, really. But I need to consider what it would mean for my daughter, for our life. I understand. And Evan? She waited until he met her eyes. Whatever you decide, Friday night doesn't change anything about your position here. You're not going to be punished for saying no, and you weren't offered this as a reward for helping me. This is a genuine opportunity based on genuine merit. I just wanted you to know that. Thank you. Patricia appeared as if summoned, clearing their plates with quiet efficiency. Scarlett checked her watch and sighed. I have a board meeting in 15 minutes. They're going to try to push back on the Denver timeline, and I'm going to have to remind them that playing it safe is how companies become irrelevant. She stood, and Evan did the same. Think about the offer. Take whatever time you need. Patricia will send you the full project details and compensation structure. They shook hands, and Evan left the office with his mind full of possibilities and complications. The elevator ride down was a blur. Back at his desk, he tried to focus on work, but his thoughts kept circling the offer, examining it from every angle, weighing pros and cons like variables in an equation. That evening, after dinner and homework, and Addison's detailed complaint about the injustice of having to write a book report on a book with actual chapters, not a graphic novel, Dad. It's basically medieval torture. Evan found himself staring at his laptop, reading through the project details Patricia had sent. The scope was breathtaking. The compensation would change their lives. He could afford a better apartment, could save aggressively for Addison's college, could stop worrying quite so much about car repairs and unexpected expenses. But it would also mean late nights, weekend work, constant pressure to deliver results. His phone buzzed. Monica's name appeared on the screen. "Hey," he answered. "What's up?" "Nothing, just checking in. You sounded weird when you texted earlier." "Weird how?" "Distracted. Usually your texts are like 3 words and maybe a punctuation mark if I'm lucky. Today you sent a whole paragraph about your day. It freaked me out." Despite everything, Evan smiled. "I got offered a promotion, big one." "That's amazing. Congratulations. Why don't you sound happy about it?" "Because I don't know if I should take it." Monica was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was gentle. "This is about Addison. Everything's about Addison. Evan, listen to me. Sarah would want you to live your life, to take opportunities, to be more than just Addison's dad." "I am more than just her dad." "Are you? When's the last time you did something just for yourself? Went out with friends, pursued a hobby, took a risk?" "I'm perfectly content with my life." "Content isn't the same as happy, and you know it." She sighed. "Look, I'm not saying you should definitely take this job, but I am saying you should consider it for the right reasons, not because you're afraid that building a career means you're failing as a father." After they hung up, Evan sat in the dark living room for a long time, listening to the building's familiar sounds, the pipes clanking, the neighbors arguing about something trivial, the distant siren of an ambulance heading toward one of the nearby hospitals. This apartment, this life, was safe, predictable, enough. But was enough really enough? Friday morning, Evan made his decision. He'd spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, running scenarios, weighing options, until finally around 3 a.m. Something clicked into place. Monica was right. Content wasn't the same as happy. And more importantly, showing Addison that it was okay to take risks, to grow, to reach for opportunities even when they were scary, that was parenting too. Maybe the most important kind. He called Patricia at 9:15 before he could second-guess himself. "I'd like to speak with Miss Rowan about the project. Is she available?" "She has a meeting at 9:30, but I can squeeze you in now if you can get up here quickly." "I'm on my way." This time, the elevator ride felt different. Not anxious, but purposeful. He'd made his choice and he trusted it, even though trust felt like jumping off a cliff and hoping the landing would be soft. When Patricia showed him into Scarlett's office, the CEO was standing at her desk, reviewing what looked like architectural plans spread across the surface. "Evan." She looked up, and something in her expression suggested she already knew what he was going to say. "You've decided." "I want to take the position, lead the development team." A smile crossed her face, genuine and warm in a way he'd rarely seen from her. "I'm glad, really glad. But I need to set some boundaries first." The smile didn't fade, but it shifted slightly, becoming more interested. "I'm listening." "My daughter comes first, always. That means I can't work late every night, can't be available every weekend, can't put the project ahead of her needs. I'll work hard, I'll deliver results, but I won't sacrifice being her father for being your employee." Scarlett was quiet for a moment, studying him. Then she moved around the desk and leaned against it, her posture more relaxed than formal. "Do you know why I really offered you this position?" "You said it was because of my integrity." "That's part of it. But the bigger reason is because you understand priorities in a way most people in this building don't. You know what actually matters. And I need that perspective on this project, because if we build something that requires people to destroy their lives to maintain it, we've failed no matter how profitable it becomes." She crossed her arms, but it wasn't defensive, more thoughtful. "So yes, your daughter comes first. I expect that. And I'll structure the team and the timeline to accommodate it. If that means hiring additional support or adjusting deadlines, we'll do it. Because I'd rather have you working reasonable hours and staying engaged than burning out in 6 months." Evan felt something unknot in his chest, a tension he hadn't fully acknowledged until it released. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is still going to be demanding work, just not soul-destroying work." She pushed off the desk and extended her hand. "Welcome to the project, Evan. Patricia will handle all the paperwork and transition details. You'll start officially next Monday, which gives you a week to wrap up your current responsibilities." They shook hands, and this time the gesture felt less formal, more like a partnership being sealed between equals. As Evan turned to leave, Scarlett called after him. "Evan, bring Addison by sometime. I'd like to meet her." He turned back, surprised. You want to meet my daughter? If you're comfortable with it, I'd like to meet the person who's shaped who you are, who taught you what's worth protecting. She'd probably spend the whole time asking you about what it's like to be a CEO. Fair warning, she has no filter. Scarlett laughed, and it was such an unguarded sound that Evan found himself smiling in response. I think I can handle it. The rest of the day passed in a blur of administrative tasks and congratulations from colleagues who'd somehow already heard about his promotion. Marcus was particularly enthusiastic, insisting they had to celebrate properly, even though Evan reminded him that celebrating for him meant pizza and bed by 10. That evening, Evan picked Addison up from soccer practice and took her to their favorite pizza place, a small joint called Sal's that had been there since the 80s and refused to modernize despite numerous attempts by hipster restaurateurs to buy them out. "So," he said, watching her destroy her third slice of pepperoni, "I have some news." Addison looked up, suddenly alert. "Did you finally get me those cleats?" "Different news, I got promoted at work." "Oh." She processed this, then brightened. "Does that mean we're rich now?" "It means we're more financially stable now, and I'll be able to get you those cleats without having to choose between them and groceries." "Sweet." Then her expression shifted, becoming more serious in that way she had of suddenly seeming much older than 11. "Does it mean you're going to be gone more, like working late and stuff?" This was the conversation he'd been both anticipating and dreading. "It means I'll have more responsibility, but I talked to my boss about making sure I'm still here for you, still at your games, still helping with homework, still making terrible jokes at breakfast." "Your jokes aren't terrible. They're just dad jokes." She picked at her crust, not meeting his eyes. "Maya's dad got a big promotion last year. Now she barely sees him. He misses all her stuff." Evan reached across the table and waited until she looked at him. "Addison, listen to me. You are the most important thing in my life. More important than any job, any promotion, any amount of money. I will never let work come between us. Do you understand?" "You promise?" "I promise." She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied. "Okay, but I'm holding you to that. I wouldn't expect anything less." They finished their pizza and drove home through streets that were just starting to show signs of early spring. The trees were still bare, but there was something different in the air, a promise that winter wouldn't last forever. Addison chattered about soccer and school drama and how her science teacher, Mr. Peterson, had apparently mispronounced organism in a way that sent the entire class into hysterics. Later, after Addison was in bed and the apartment was quiet except for the familiar nighttime sounds, Evan sat at his laptop and drafted an email to his current manager, officially accepting the transition to the new project. Then he opened a different document, one he'd been avoiding for 3 years. It was a journal Sarah had given him for his 30th birthday, leather-bound and empty except for her inscription on the first page. "For all the thoughts you keep locked up inside, let some of them out. Love, S." He'd never written a single word in it. Every time he'd tried, the blankness of the page had felt like an accusation, like proof that he couldn't articulate the things that mattered. But tonight, with the decision made and his future shifting into new patterns, he picked up a pen and started writing. The words came slowly at first, then faster. He wrote about Scarlett, about the strange connection they'd formed, about how helping her had reminded him that he was still capable of seeing beyond his own carefully controlled world. He wrote about the promotion, about his fears and hopes, about wanting to be more for Addison than just the parent who survived. He wrote about Sarah, about missing her, about the guilt that sometimes crept in when he realized he'd gone a whole day without thinking about her. When he finally set down the pen, it was past midnight and his hand was cramping. But something felt lighter, like he'd released pressure he hadn't known was building. He closed the journal, put it away, and went to bed with the strange sense that maybe, just maybe, he was starting to move forward instead of just surviving. The following Monday, Evan officially transitioned to his new role. His office wasn't as grand as Scarlett's, nobody's was, but it was private, with a door and a window and enough space that he could actually think. The development team consisted of 6 engineers, 2 data scientists, and 1 project manager who all seemed cautiously optimistic about working under someone they'd only known as that guy from analytics who's really good with algorithms. Scarlett had set up a standing Monday morning meeting, just the 2 of them, to review progress and address any issues before they became problems. The first one was at 8 a.m., earlier than Evan typically started, but Addison's school didn't begin until 8:30, so Monica had agreed to handle morning drop-off on Mondays. He arrived at Scarlett's office at 7:55, carrying the project status report he'd spent most of Sunday preparing. Patricia waved him in with a knowing smile that suggested she'd seen plenty of nervous new project leads over the years. Scarlett was already at her desk, reading something on her tablet with the focused intensity that suggested she'd been working for hours. She looked up when he entered, and he noticed she looked better than she had 2 weeks ago, less exhausted around the eyes, more present. "Evan? Good morning. Coffee? Please." She poured from a carafe on the side table, actual good coffee, not the break room sludge, and handed him a cup. "How's the team looking?" Eager but cautious. They want to believe this project is as groundbreaking as we're telling them, but they've been burned before by initiatives that got defunded halfway through. "That won't happen here. I've committed the resources through completion." She settled into the chair across from him rather than behind her desk, creating a more collaborative atmosphere. "Walk me through your timeline." For the next 45 minutes, they discussed technical specifications, resource allocation, and potential obstacles. Scarlett asked sharp questions that made it clear she understood the work at a deeper level than most CEOs would. She pushed back on his timeline in 2 places, but when he explained his reasoning, she accepted it. "You're right," she said, making a note on her tablet. "I was thinking about market pressure rather than sustainable development. That's a mistake." The admission surprised him. In his experience, executives rarely acknowledged when they were wrong, especially to subordinates. But Scarlett seemed to operate on different rules, at least in private. She demanded excellence, but didn't require perfection, expected results, but understood process. As they wrapped up, she asked, "How's Addison adjusting to the new schedule?" "She's okay. Monica's been helping with mornings, and I'm home by 6 every night. We're finding our rhythm." "Good." Scarlett hesitated, then added, "I meant what I said about meeting her, if you're comfortable with it." "I am. Maybe next week? I could bring her by after school one day." "Wednesday would work. I have a lighter afternoon." Something shifted in her expression, a vulnerability showing through. "I'll try not to intimidate her." "You won't." She's convinced that CEOs are basically superheroes who wear suits instead of capes. You'll probably end up disappointing her by being normal. "I'll do my best to live up to the superhero standard." Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Monday morning meetings with Scarlett, where they talked about the project, but also increasingly about other things. Wednesday team reviews, where Evan's group presented their progress, and he discovered he was actually good at leadership in ways he'd never expected. Friday afternoon check-ins, where he and Scarlett would grab coffee from the executive floor's private machine and stand by the windows, watching Chicago and talking about nothing important. The project was going well, more than well. They were ahead of schedule. The technology was performing better than projected, and early tests with partner companies were generating significant interest. But what surprised Evan more than the professional success was how much he genuinely enjoyed the work, enjoyed the challenge, enjoyed the collaboration with people who were as invested in excellence as he was. And he enjoyed working with Scarlett. It had started professionally, but somewhere along the way it had shifted into something more complex. She was brilliant in ways that challenged him to think differently, funny in ways that caught him off guard, and surprisingly vulnerable when she let her guard down. She'd continued therapy, had stopped drinking entirely rather than trying to moderate, and was slowly building a life outside the office that included actual friendships and hobbies that weren't work adjacent. "I joined a book club," she told him one Friday afternoon, and she sounded almost embarrassed about it. A real one, not a CEO networking thing disguised as literature discussion. Just regular people sitting in someone's living room arguing about whether the ending of the book was satisfying. "That's great. What are you reading?" "Currently, a mystery novel that everyone but me has figured out by chapter 3. I'm apparently terrible at seeing plot twists coming." "You're excellent at seeing business strategy patterns, though, so I think it evens out." She'd laughed, that same unguarded sound that was becoming more frequent, and Evan had felt something shift in his chest. A recognition of something he'd been deliberately not examining too closely. On Wednesday of the 4th week after his promotion, Evan brought Addison to the office as planned. She'd insisted on wearing her professional outfit, a dress Monica had helped her pick out that was probably too formal for an 11-year-old, but made her feel grown up and confident. "Remember," Evan said in the elevator, "Ms. Rowan is my boss, so be respectful." "I know how to be respectful, Dad." Addison rolled her eyes in that preteen way that suggested she thought he was being ridiculous. "I'm not going to embarrass you." "I'm not worried about that. I just want you to be yourself." Patricia greeted them with genuine warmth, offering Addison a bottle of water and complimenting her dress. "Ms. Rowan is just finishing a call. She'll be with you in just a moment." Addison looked around the executive floor with wide eyes, taking in the art and the views and the general sense of refined power that the space projected. "Dad," she whispered, "this is so cool." "Don't get too impressed. It's still just an office." "It's an office with a view of the entire city." The door opened and Scarlett emerged, and Evan saw her the way Addison must be seeing her. Intimidating and impressive in a charcoal suit, her dark hair perfect, her posture radiating confidence. But then Scarlett smiled, and the intimidation softened into something more approachable. "You must be Addison." "I'm Scarlett. It's wonderful to meet you." Addison shook her hand with the serious formality of someone trying very hard to make a good impression. "It's nice to meet you too, Ms. Rowan. Thank you for giving my dad this opportunity." "Your dad earned this opportunity all by himself. I'm just grateful he accepted it." Scarlett glanced at Evan. "She's lovely. You must be very proud." "Every single day." Scarlett led them into her office, and for the next 30 minutes, Evan watched his daughter and his boss engage in a conversation that started with polite questions and quickly evolved into genuine exchange. Addison asked about what it was like to run a company, and Scarlett answered honestly, not talking down to her but not oversimplifying either. She talked about the challenges and rewards, about making difficult decisions, about learning from failures. "Do you ever get scared?" Addison asked. "Like, that you'll make the wrong choice and mess everything up?" "All the time," Scarlett admitted. "But I've learned that being scared doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it means you're doing something important." Addison absorbed this, nodding thoughtfully. Then, with the directness that Evan had warned Scarlett about, she asked, "Are you and my dad friends now?" "He talks about you different than he talks about other people he works with." Evan felt his face heat. "Addison, it's okay." Scarlett's expression was carefully neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. "I'd like to think we're friends, yes. Your dad helped me through a difficult time, and I value his perspective and his company." "Good. He needs more friends. He mostly just hangs out with me and Aunt Monica." Addison paused, then added with the brutal honesty of children, "He's been happier lately, since he started working on your project. I think it's good for him." "I'm glad to hear that." Scarlett looked at Evan, and there was something in that look, recognition, maybe, or acknowledgement of something neither of them had named yet. "I think working together has been good for both of us." After they left the office, Addison chattered the entire drive home about how cool Ms. Rowan was, how amazing the office was, how she definitely wanted to be a CEO when she grew up, because you get to make decisions and help people and have an office with a view. "She liked you," Evan said. "A lot." "She's pretty," Addison said matter-of-factly. "And smart. And she looked at you the way Maya's mom looks at her dad." Evan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What does that mean?" "I don't know, like you're interesting, like she wants to keep talking to you even when the conversation's over." Addison shrugged. "Mom used to look at you like that." The observation sat between them for a moment, heavy with implications. Finally, Evan said, "Ms. Rowan is my boss, sweetheart. We work together. Mom was a nurse and you were a patient. Then you worked together. Then you got married. That's not... We're not..." Evan stopped, realizing he was protesting something Addison hadn't actually accused him of. "It's complicated. Adults always say that when they don't want to explain something." She wasn't wrong, but how did you explain to your 11-year-old daughter that you might be developing feelings for someone? That those feelings were terrifying and inappropriate and genuine all at once? That you had no idea what to do about them? "You're right," he said instead. "It is complicated. But I promise, if anything changes, you'll be the first to know." That seemed to satisfy her, and she returned to cataloging all the details of Scarlett's office, her dress, the way she talked, building a mental image of what success looked like so she could aim for it herself someday. That night, after Addison was asleep, Evan's phone buzzed with a text from Scarlett. He stared at it for a moment before opening it, aware that personal texts from his CEO crossed some invisible line they'd been carefully avoiding. The message was simple. "Thank you for bringing Addison by. She's remarkable. You're doing an incredible job with her." He typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on, "Thank you. She really enjoyed meeting you." 3 dots appeared, indicating Scarlett was typing. They disappeared, appeared again. Then finally, "Would you want to have dinner sometime outside of work, just to talk?" Evan stared at the screen, his heart rate accelerating in a way that felt dangerous. This was a threshold. Crossing it would change things in ways he couldn't predict or control. Not crossing it would leave him wondering what might have happened if he'd been brave enough to take the risk. He thought about Addison's observation, about the way Scarlett had looked at him, about the growing sense that they were building something beyond professional collaboration. He thought about Monica's words, that content wasn't the same as happy, that Sarah would want him to live his life. He thought about patterns and how they could shift, how one small choice could cascade into an entirely different future. His thumbs moved across the screen. "Yes, I'd like that." The restaurant Scarlett chose wasn't what Evan expected. No white tablecloths or sommeliers or the kind of hushed atmosphere where conversations felt like performances. Instead, it was a small Italian place in a neighborhood that probably didn't make anyone's list of trendy dining destinations. Checkered tablecloths, candles in wine bottles, the smell of garlic and fresh bread overwhelming in the best possible way. "I hope this is okay," Scarlett said as they were seated in a corner booth. She'd traded her usual power suits for dark jeans and a simple sweater, her hair down instead of pinned up. She looked younger, softer, more like someone Evan might have met at a bookstore than in a boardroom. "I know it's not fancy, but the food is incredible and nobody from the office ever comes here. It's perfect." And it was. The casualness of it felt deliberate, like she was showing him a version of herself that didn't perform for audiences. They ordered chicken parmesan for him, eggplant rollatini for her, and settled into the kind of conversation that felt both natural and terrifying. Not the careful professional exchanges they'd perfected over the past weeks, but something more honest, more revealing. "Can I ask you something?" Scarlett said, tracing the rim of her water glass with one finger. "And you can tell me if I'm overstepping." "Go ahead." "That night at the gala, when you drove me home, was it really just about not wanting to look away? Or was there something else?" Evan considered the question carefully, knowing his answer mattered. At first, yes. It was about not looking away, about seeing someone who needed help. But in the car, when we talked, that became something different. "You were vulnerable with me in a way I don't think you are with many people. And I recognize that vulnerability because I've lived it. We connected." "We did?" She met his eyes. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about that night. Not just the embarrassment of losing control, but the conversation after. The way you saw me as a person instead of a position. Do you know how rare that is?" "I think I'm starting to understand." The food arrived, and they ate while trading stories. Scarlett told him about growing up in Ohio, about her mother who'd believed in her even when no one else did, about the first company she'd built with borrowed money and borrowed courage. Evan talked about meeting Sarah in a hospital emergency room after a stupid accident involving a ladder and overconfidence, about how she'd insisted on checking his stitches herself even though she was technically off duty, about how he'd fallen in love with her efficiency before he'd even noticed her smile. "She sounds like she was wonderful," Scarlett said softly. She was. She was also stubborn and competitive and absolutely terrible at karaoke, but insisted on doing it anyway. Evan smiled at the memory. "When she died, I thought that was it, that I'd had my great love and nothing would ever come close again. And now?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Evan set down his fork, forcing himself to meet her gaze directly. "Now I'm sitting across from someone who makes me want to reconsider what's possible." Something shifted in Scarlett's expression. Surprise. pleasure, fear, all mixing together. Evan, I need you to understand something. I'm not good at this. Relationships, I mean. I'm better at acquisitions and contracts, things with clear terms and measurable outcomes. People are, she gestured vaguely, messy. And I'm scared that if we try this, if we cross this line, I'll mess it up and lose what we already have. We might, Evan agreed. That's the risk. You're very calm about that possibility. I'm not calm. I'm terrified. He reached across the table, and after a moment's hesitation, she placed her hand in his. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly. But I've learned that being scared doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. Someone wise told me that recently. Scarlett laughed, but it was shaky. Using my own words against me. Is it working? Maybe. She squeezed his hand. I have conditions, though. If we do this, and I mean really do this, not just see what happens, then we need rules, boundaries. Okay? First, work stays work. We don't bring personal conflicts into the office, and we don't let our relationship affect professional decisions. If the project needs something, we treat it objectively. Agreed. Second, Addison comes first, always. If this interferes with your relationship with her in any way, we stop. No questions, no guilt. Absolutely. Third, she paused, seeming to gather courage. Third, we go slow. I've been in therapy for over a month now, and Dr. Morrison keeps telling me I have a tendency to either avoid intimacy completely or rush into it so fast I don't process what I'm actually feeling. So we go slow. We figure out what this is before we decide what it could be. Evan nodded, finding unexpected relief in the structure she was creating. Slow sounds good. Slow sounds safe. Safe. She repeated the word like she was testing it. When's the last time either of us felt safe? I feel safe with you. The admission seemed to surprise them both. Scarlett's eyes widened slightly, and then she was smiling, really smiling. Not the practiced corporate version, but something genuine and bright that transformed her entire face. I feel safe with you too, she said quietly. That's what scares me most. They left the restaurant after 10, stepping out into a Chicago spring evening that still carried winter's chill. Scarlett had driven herself, a modest Audi that she'd apparently owned for years, refusing to upgrade to something flashier despite her wealth. I can follow you home, Evan offered. Make sure you get there safely. I'm sober and it's barely past 10. I think I can manage. But she was smiling and she didn't move toward her car. Although I wouldn't mind talking a little longer. Walk with me? They walked without destination, just moving through streets that were still busy with Friday night energy. Young professionals spilling out of bars, couples holding hands, the city alive in the way it only was when weather finally shifted toward warmth. Evan was hyper-aware of Scarlett beside him. The occasional brush of their arms, the way she matched her pace to his, the comfortable silence that settled between their conversations. Can I tell you something? Scarlett said after they'd walked for several blocks. Something I haven't told anyone else? Of course. When my mother was dying, I made her a promise. I told her I'd live a full life, not just build a successful company, but actually live. Have relationships, take vacations, do things that weren't measured in profit margins and market share. She stopped walking, turning to face him. I broke that promise. For 4 years, I've hidden behind work and convinced myself that success was enough. But it's not. And I think part of why I was drinking, why I was so lost that night at the gala, I was drowning in the guilt of breaking my promise to the person who mattered most. You can still keep it, Evan said gently. The promise, I mean. It's not too late. That's what Dr. Morrison says, that every day is a chance to choose differently. She reached for his hand again, holding it between both of hers like something precious. I want to choose differently, Evan. I want to try. Then we try. They stood there on a Chicago sidewalk while the city moved around them, two people who'd found each other in the unlikeliest of circumstances, holding on to the possibility of something neither of them fully understood yet. Finally, Scarlett stood on her toes and pressed a kiss to his cheek, brief, soft, carrying the weight of everything they weren't saying yet. Good night, Evan. Good night, Scarlett. He watched her walk back toward where they'd left their cars, watched until she turned the corner and disappeared from view. Then he stood there a moment longer, touching the spot on his cheek where her lips had been, trying to process the fact that his life had just shifted again into patterns he couldn't predict. The next morning, Addison noticed immediately. She'd developed a radar for changes in his emotional state, probably from 3 years of watching him carefully for signs that grief was overwhelming him again. "You're humming," she said over breakfast, looking at him suspiciously. "You never hum." "I'm in a good mood." "Because of work?" "Because of a lot of things." "Did you see Miss Rowan last night?" The question was casual, but her eyes were sharp. "You said you were meeting a friend for dinner." Evan had promised himself he wouldn't lie to Addison, but he also wasn't sure how to explain something he barely understood himself. "I did see her, yes. We had dinner, just talking, getting to know each other better." "Like a date?" "Maybe. I don't know yet. It's complicated." "You said you'd tell me if anything changed." There was accusation in her voice, but underneath it something else. Fear, maybe. Or the complicated grief of a child who'd lost her mother and was watching her father potentially move towards someone new. Evan set down his coffee and gave Addison his full attention. "You're right. I did say that. So here's what's changing. Scarlett and I are going to spend time together outside of work. Get to know each other better. See if there's something more than friendship there. But nothing is decided. Nothing is serious yet. And you..." He waited until she looked at him. "You will always be my priority. Always. If this makes you uncomfortable, if you need me to slow down or stop, you tell me." Addison picked at her cereal, not meeting his eyes. "Do you like her? Like her?" "I think I might, yes." "Does she like you back?" "I think so." "Would she be..." Addison's voice got very small. "Would she try to be like Mom?" "No." Evan reached across the table and took her hand. "Nobody could be like Mom. Nobody will ever replace her. Scarlett knows that, and I know that. If this becomes something real, it'll be its own thing. Different, not better or worse, just different." "But what if I don't like her?" "Then we'll figure it out together. But Addison, you already met her. You said you liked her." "That was before she was maybe going to date my dad." Addison pulled her hand back, crossing her arms. "It's different now." "Okay, that's fair. So what do you need from me?" She thought about it for a long moment. "Time. I need time to get used to the idea. And I need you to promise that if you start dating her for real, I get to have opinions about it." "You always get to have opinions." "Even if they're negative opinions?" "Especially then." "Your feelings matter, Addison. They always matter." That seemed to satisfy her, at least temporarily. They finished breakfast and Evan took her shopping for the new cleats, letting her take her time choosing between 3 nearly identical options while she explained in elaborate detail why the shade of blue mattered more than he could possibly understand. It was normal, comfortable, the kind of Saturday routine that anchored both their lives. But underneath the normalcy, Evan felt the shift. The future looked different now, held possibilities he'd thought were closed to him permanently. It was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. That afternoon, while Addison was at Maya's house for a playdate, Evan's phone rang. Monica's name appeared on the screen. "So," she said without preamble, "I hear you went on a date with your boss." Evan sighed. "How did you..." "Addison called you, didn't she?" She's worried, also excited, also confused, basically processing a lot of feelings and needed an adult who wasn't you to talk to. Monica's tone gentled. "How are you doing with all this?" He paused, trying to articulate something he hadn't fully examined. "I'm okay. Good. Actually, scared, but good. Sarah would be happy for you." "I don't know about that." "I do. I knew her probably as well as you did, Evan. She wouldn't want you spending the rest of your life alone. She'd want you to find happiness again." "It feels disloyal somehow." "It's not. Loving someone new doesn't diminish what you had with Sarah. It just means you're still capable of love, still willing to risk your heart. That's not betrayal. That's survival." She paused. "But I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to really think about it before answering." "Okay." Are you interested in Scarlett because of who she is, or because she was vulnerable with you and you've spent 3 years in caretaker mode? Because if it's the latter, that's not fair to either of you. The question landed hard because it was one Evan had been avoiding asking himself. I think it started with the caretaking impulse, but it's become more than that. She challenges me intellectually, makes me want to be better, sees parts of me I'd forgotten existed. It's not just about taking care of her. Good, because she doesn't need a savior, she needs a partner. And you need someone who sees you as more than just Addison's dad or Sarah's widower. When did you get so wise? I've always been this wise. You've just been too busy surviving to notice. She laughed. Just take it slow, okay? For your sake and Addison's, don't rush into anything because it feels good to be wanted again. After they hung up, Evan sat with Monica's words, testing them against his feelings. Was he rushing? Was he confusing gratitude and attraction? Or was this real, this pull towards Scarlett that felt both terrifying and inevitable? His phone buzzed with a text. Scarlett's name appeared with a photo attachment, a book club photo showing her squeezed onto a couch with 5 other women, all of them laughing at something off camera. She looked genuinely happy, relaxed in a way he'd never seen in the office. The accompanying text read, "Proof that I'm building a life outside work. They made me laugh so hard I snorted wine out my nose, very dignified. Hope your Saturday is going well." Evan smiled and typed back, "Took Addison shopping for cleats?" She chose based on vibes, which apparently is a legitimate selection criterion now. "Glad you're having fun." Cleats have vibes. Obviously. Over the following weeks, they found their rhythm. Professional during work hours, carefully maintaining boundaries that kept their relationship from interfering with the project. But outside the office, they built something else. Coffee on Sunday mornings at a cafe halfway between their apartments. Lunch on Wednesdays when Scarlett's schedule allowed. Long phone conversations late at night when Addison was asleep and the world felt small enough to contain just 2 voices. They talked about everything. Scarlett told him about her first failed business, about the shame of bankruptcy at 25, about crawling back and building something stronger from the ruins. Evan shared the harder parts of grief, the anger he'd felt at Sarah for driving tired, the guilt of that anger, the slow process of forgiveness both of her and himself. "Do you think Addison will ever really accept me?" Scarlett asked one evening. They were walking through Lincoln Park, the late April weather finally warm enough for short sleeves. "I know she's been polite when we've crossed paths, but there's this distance, like she's waiting for me to prove something. She's protecting herself. And me. She's seen what loss does, and she's scared of getting attached to someone who might leave. I'm not going anywhere. You can't promise that, neither can I. That's what makes this scary." Scarlett was quiet for a moment, watching families on the grass, couples sharing blankets, the normal everyday intimacy of people who'd chosen each other. "I want to meet her properly. Not as your boss, but as the person you're dating, if that's what we're calling this." "Is that what we're calling this?" "I don't know. What would you call it?" Evan stopped walking and turned to face her. They'd been dancing around definitions for weeks, both of them too scared to name what was happening between them. But standing there in the park with the spring sun warm on their faces, it suddenly felt important to be honest. "I'd call it the beginning of something real," he said. "Something worth protecting and nurturing, something that scares me and excites me and feels like maybe I'm finally ready to stop just surviving and start living again." Scarlett's eyes went bright. "That's the most words I've ever heard you string together at once. Is that a good thing?" "It's a very good thing." She reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together in a gesture that had become familiar, comforting. "So when do I get to properly court your daughter's approval?" "Dinner at my place Friday? I'll make my famous spaghetti, which is famous only to Addison and only because I make it every Friday." "Sounds perfect." Friday arrived with Evan more nervous than he'd been in years. He cleaned the apartment twice, changed shirts 3 times, and was obsessing over whether the garlic bread was too garlicky when Addison found him in the kitchen. "Dad, you're being weird." "I'm not being weird." "You've checked your phone like 50 times in the last hour. You're definitely being weird." She hopped up onto the counter, watching him with those 2 observant eyes. "You really like her, don't you?" "Yes." "Like more than just friend-like?" "Yes." Addison nodded slowly, processing this. Okay, but if she's mean to you or doesn't laugh at your jokes, I'm kicking her out. Deal. When Scarlett arrived at 6:30, she'd brought flowers for Addison and wine for Evan, then immediately caught herself. Actually, I should have thought that through better. I brought sparkling cider instead. She produced a second bottle from her bag, looking genuinely embarrassed. I'm still learning all the nuances of this. The thought was kind, Evan said, taking both bottles, and the cider is perfect. Dinner was surprisingly easy. Scarlett asked Addison about school and soccer and her friends, actually listening to the answers instead of just waiting for her turn to talk. Addison, in turn, interrogated Scarlett about what it was like to run a company, whether she ever got to fire people who deserved it, and whether the view from her office ever got boring. Never, Scarlett said seriously. Every day the light is different. Every season changes the way the buildings look. You could watch that view for a lifetime and still see something new. That's kind of poetic, Addison said, sounding surprised. I thought CEOs only talked about money and stuff. We talk about money a lot, Scarlett admitted, but most of us got into business because we saw something we wanted to build or change or fix. The money is how we keep score, but it's not actually the point. After dinner, while Evan cleaned up, he heard laughter from the living room. He paused in the doorway to find Scarlett and Addison looking at photo albums, the ones Sarah had made documenting Addison's first years, full of hospital pictures and birthday parties and ordinary moments elevated to precious by their preservation. "This is your mom?" Scarlett was asking, pointing to a photo of Sarah holding newborn Addison, her face exhausted and radiant. "Yeah, she was really pretty. She was beautiful. You look like her. Everyone says I have Dad's eyes, though." "You do, but your smile is all hers." Scarlett looked up, catching Evan's eye. There was something in her expression, respect maybe, or recognition that she was being trusted with something precious. Later, after Addison had gone to bed with minimal protest and surprising acceptance of Scarlett's presence, Evan and Scarlett sat on the worn couch with careful space between them. "That went well," Scarlett said. "I think she might actually tolerate me." "She likes you. She's just cautious." "I don't blame her. I'd be cautious too." Scarlett shifted slightly, closing some of the distance between them. "Thank you for letting me into your life like this. Into her life. I know it's not easy. Nothing worthwhile is easy. Is that another thing Sarah taught you?" "That's something I learned watching her die and choosing to keep living." Evan reached for Scarlett's hand, feeling braver in his own space with his daughter safe down the hall. "She taught me that love was worth the risk of loss, that protecting yourself from pain also meant closing yourself off from joy, and I think I'm finally ready to risk the pain again." Scarlett's hand tightened on his. "Evan, I need you to understand something. I'm going to mess this up sometimes. I'm going to get too focused on work or say the wrong thing, or forget that not everything can be solved with strategic planning. I'm fundamentally broken in some ways, and therapy is helping, but it's not a miracle cure. I'm going to mess up too. I'm going to be overprotective of Addison, or pull away when things get intense, or compare you to Sarah, even though that's not fair. We're both broken in our own ways. Maybe that's okay. Maybe broken things can fit together if they're careful. Or maybe they can fit together because they're broken. Maybe the edges line up better that way." Scarlett laughed softly, and then she was leaning forward, and Evan was meeting her halfway, and their lips came together in a kiss that tasted like possibility and risk and all the careful hope they'd been building over weeks of learning each other. When they pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Scarlett rested her forehead against his. "This is real, isn't it? This thing we're building?" "Yes. I'm terrified." "Me too. But you're still here. So are you." They sat there in Evan's small apartment with its cheap furniture and photo albums and evidence of life being lived, and for the first time in years, Evan felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not just surviving anymore, but actually living, building something new without erasing what came before, choosing possibility over safety. And when Scarlett kissed him again, soft and sweet and full of promise, he kissed her back and thought that maybe, just maybe, his life's pattern was shifting into something beautiful. The weeks that followed that first kiss unfolded with the kind of careful deliberation that comes from two people who've learned the cost of carelessness. Evan and Scarlett didn't rush. They built their relationship in small moments accumulated over time. Coffee before work meetings, walks through neighborhoods neither of them knew, conversations that lasted until both their phones were blinking low battery warnings. At the office, they maintained their professional boundaries with almost painful precision. In Monday morning meetings, Scarlett was still the CEO demanding excellence, and Evan was still the project lead delivering it. The development team made remarkable progress. The AI platform exceeded every projection, and early adoption numbers suggested they were building something genuinely transformative. Success felt earned rather than lucky, built on solid work rather than favorable circumstances. But outside those office walls, they were something else entirely. They were two people learning each other's rhythms and weaknesses, and the small intimacies that define real connection. Scarlett learned that Evan was terrible at mornings until his second cup of coffee, that he had an irrational affection for detective novels with absurd plot twists, that he still wore his wedding ring on a chain around his neck, and probably always would. Evan learned that Scarlett sang off-key in the shower, that she was secretly addicted to reality television she'd never admit to watching, that she kept every card and drawing Addison had ever given her in a special folder she'd labeled Things That Matter. Addison remained cautious but was gradually warming. She'd stopped referring to Scarlett as Ms. Rowan and started using her first name, which Evan recognized as a significant threshold. When Scarlett came for dinner, which had become a weekly Friday tradition, Addison would show her school projects and soccer trophies, and the elaborate drawings she created in art class. She tested Scarlett in small ways, watching to see if this woman would disappoint or dismiss or fail to follow through on promises. Scarlett never did. When she said she'd attend one of Addison's soccer games, she showed up despite a board meeting running long, still in her work clothes but cheering loudly from the sidelines. When Addison mentioned wanting to learn about business, Scarlett brought her books and spent an hour explaining market dynamics in terms an 11-year-old could grasp. When Addison had a nightmare about her mother and woke up crying, and Evan was at the store, Scarlett sat with her and didn't try to fix anything, just listened while Addison talked about memories that were getting harder to hold on to. "I'm scared I'm going to forget her voice," Addison had confessed, and Scarlett had said simply, "Then we'll make sure you have recordings, videos, voicemails, anything we can find. Your dad probably has some saved." Later, Evan had found dozens of voice recordings on his old phone. Sarah leaving messages about picking up milk, laughing at something Addison had done, singing lullabies when Addison couldn't sleep. He'd transferred them all to a secure drive and given Addison her own copy, and she'd cried and thanked him and asked if it was okay that she liked Scarlett, even though she still missed Mom. "It's more than okay," Evan had told her. "Mom would want you to be happy. She'd want both of us to be happy." 3 months into their relationship, Marcus cornered Evan by the coffee machine with an expression that suggested he'd been holding back questions for weeks. "Okay, I can't take it anymore. You and Scarlett Rowan. Are you two actually dating? Because the rumors have gotten completely out of hand and I need to know if I should be defending your honor or just enjoying the gossip." "We're together, yes," Evan said, keeping his voice neutral. "Together like dating together? Or together like engaged together? Or together like dating, seriously, taking it slow?" Marcus whistled low. "Man, you're living every employee's fantasy. The CEO actually notices you exist." "It's not like that." I know. You guys connected on a deep emotional level or whatever." Marcus grinned. "But still, pretty cool." The gossip didn't bother Evan as much as he'd expected. People talked, but it was mostly harmless speculation fueled by the novelty of their CEO dating someone from within the company. Scarlett handled it with characteristic directness, addressing it in a company-wide email that was brief and clear. She and Evan were in a relationship, it didn't affect their professional judgment, and anyone who had concerns about favoritism or conflicts of interest should feel free to contact HR. "Ripping the Band-Aid off," she'd explained to Evan. "Better than letting people whisper and wonder." By June, when Chicago finally committed to summer and the lake beckoned with promises of cooler air, Evan realized something had shifted. He wasn't just dating Scarlett anymore. He was building a life with her. The distinction felt important, a recognition that they'd moved past testing the waters into actually swimming. It was Scarlett who first said the words, on a Sunday afternoon when they were walking through the Botanic Garden with Addison running ahead to examine flowers that caught her attention. The day was perfect. Blue sky, warm sun, the smell of roses and fresh-cut grass filling the air. I love you, Scarlett said suddenly, like the words had been building pressure and finally burst free. I know we said we'd take it slow, and maybe this is too fast, but I love you, and I needed you to know. Evan stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Addison was still ahead, crouched by a flower bed and absorbed in her own world. Around them, other families and couples moved through the gardens, everyone existing in their own small universes of connection and separation. I love you too, he said, and saying it felt like jumping off a cliff and discovering he could fly. I think I've loved you since that first conversation in the car, when you were honest enough to admit you were struggling and brave enough to accept help. That's a very specific moment to fall in love. I'm a very specific person. She laughed and kissed him there in the middle of the path, not caring who saw. And Evan kissed her back and felt something settle deep in his chest. Not the wild, consuming passion of young love, but something steadier and deeper. The kind of love that was built rather than struck, that grew from accumulated moments of choosing each other over and over again. Addison noticed the kiss, of course. She had a radar for parental affection that bordered on supernatural. She came running back, her face flushed from sun and exertion, and looked between them with an expression Evan couldn't quite read. You guys are being gross, she announced. Extremely gross, Scarlett agreed solemnly. The grossest. Good. Addison's face broke into a grin. You should be gross. That means you're happy. That evening, after they dropped Scarlett at her apartment and driven home, Addison was quiet in a way that suggested she was processing something significant. Evan gave her space, making dinner and setting the table while she sat at the kitchen counter doing homework with unusual focus. Finally, as they were eating, she said, Dad, can I ask you something? Always. Is Scarlett going to move in with us? The question caught him off guard. We haven't talked about that. Why do you ask? Because she's here a lot. And you're at her place sometimes. And it seems like maybe that's where this is going. She pushed pasta around her plate. I'm not saying I don't want her to. I'm just asking. Evan set down his fork, giving her his complete attention. Would you be okay with it? If she did move in? I don't know. Maybe. Addison looked up, and her eyes were older than they should be at 11. I like her, Dad. I really do. She's nice to me, and she makes you smile, and she doesn't try to pretend she's Mom. But it's scary. Having someone else in our space, changing how things work. That's fair and honest. Thank you for telling me. So are you going to do it? Ask her to move in? Not yet. We're taking things slow, remember? But Addison, if and when we get to that point, you'll be part of the decision. Your home is your safe place. I won't change that without making sure you're comfortable. She nodded, seeming satisfied with this answer, and returned to her dinner with the matter apparently settled in her mind. But Evan sat with the question long after Addison had gone to bed, examining it from every angle. He and Scarlett hadn't discussed moving in together, hadn't even really discussed the future beyond vague acknowledgments that they were building something lasting. But the question, now raised, felt inevitable. They were spending most of their free time together anyway. Scarlett kept clothes at his apartment. He had a toothbrush at hers. They'd fallen into the rhythms of cohabitation without the formality of actually sharing space. The following Friday, after their usual dinner at his place and after Addison had gone to bed, Evan broached the subject with Scarlett. They were on the couch, her legs draped across his lap, both of them tired from the week but comfortable in the kind of quiet that comes from not needing to fill every silence. Addison asked if you were going to move in with us, he said. Scarlett's expression shifted to something more alert. What did you tell her? That we hadn't discussed it, but if it happened, she'd be part of the decision. He paused. What would you say? If I asked? Are you asking? I'm thinking about asking, but I need to know if you'd want that, if you're ready for that level of commitment. Scarlett sat up, pulling her legs back and turning to face him fully. I've been thinking about it too, she admitted. More than thinking, honestly. I've been looking at houses. Houses? My penthouse is perfect for one person living alone, but it's not a home. It's not where a child would feel comfortable, where a family would fit. And I've been thinking, if we're doing this, really doing this, we should do it right. Find a place that's ours, not yours or mine, but ours, where Addison has a proper room and a backyard where we can build something new together. Evan felt something catch in his throat. You've really been thinking about this. I've been thinking about a lot of things, about what it means to build a life with someone, about how to honor what came before while creating what comes next. She reached for his hand. I love you, Evan, and I love Addison, not because I'm trying to replace Sarah, nobody could do that, but because she's an amazing kid and being part of her life feels like a privilege. I want to do this right. I want to build a family with you both, if you'll let me. Scarlett, wait, let me finish. I know this is fast. I know we said slow, but I'm 36 years old and I've spent most of my adult life avoiding exactly this kind of commitment because I was scared. Scared of failure, scared of losing control, scared of needing someone and having them leave. But you make me want to be brave. You make me want to risk everything for the chance at something real. Evan pulled her close, holding her tight against his chest, while his mind raced through implications and logistics and the sheer terrifying enormity of what they were discussing. Moving in together, buying a house, building a family. It was everything he thought was behind him. Impossible after Sarah, but here it was being offered again in a different form with a different person. I need to talk to Addison properly, he said finally. Make sure she's really okay with this, not just saying what she thinks I want to hear. And we need to find the right place, somewhere that feels right to all of us. But yes, I want this. I want to build a life with you. They spent the rest of the evening planning in the way people do when possibility becomes tangible, talking about neighborhoods and school districts and whether a yard was essential or just nice to have. It felt surreal and perfect and terrifying all at once, like standing at the edge of something enormous and choosing to jump anyway. The next morning, Evan sat Addison down for what he'd mentally labeled as the most important conversation of her childhood outside of explaining her mother's death. Scarlett and I are talking about moving in together, he said without preamble. Not here, and not at her place, but somewhere new. A house where we'd all have space, where you'd have your own room and a yard, and the chance to start fresh somewhere that belongs to all of us. Addison absorbed this quietly, her face cycling through expressions too quickly for him to read. When? We haven't decided. We wanted to make sure you were okay with it first. And if I'm not? If I say I don't want her to move in? Then we don't do it. Or we wait until you are ready. Addison, you're the most important person in my life. That doesn't change just because I love Scarlett, too. You love her, like really love her. Yes. And she loves you? She says she does. Does she love me? The question was small, vulnerable in a way that made Evan's chest ache. Why don't you ask her yourself? She's supposed to come over later. We can all talk about this together. When Scarlett arrived that afternoon, Evan had prepared her for Addison's question, but hadn't anticipated how direct Addison would be. His daughter waited approximately 5 minutes after Scarlett walked in the door before blurting out, "Do you love me?" Scarlett didn't hesitate, didn't fumble for diplomatic words. She crouched down to Addison's eye level and said simply, "Yes, I know I'm not your mom and I'm not trying to be, but you're smart and funny and brave, and getting to know you has been one of the best parts of falling in love with your dad. So yes, I love you. Even though I'm not yours, you don't have to be biologically mine for me to love you. Love doesn't work like that." Scarlett glanced at Evan, then back to Addison. "If you're willing, I'd like to be part of your family, not replacing anyone, just adding to it, making it bigger." Addison thought about this seriously, her face solemn in a way that reminded Evan painfully of Sarah. Finally, she said, "Okay, but I have conditions." "I'm listening." "First, I get to help pick the house. And I get veto power if the room they want to give me is too small or faces the wrong direction or whatever." "Absolutely fair." "Second, we bring all of Mom's pictures and stuff. I don't want to leave any of her behind." "We'll bring everything," Scarlett promised. "Your mom is part of our family's story. She always will be." "Third," Addison's voice wavered slightly. "Third, if you and Dad get married someday, I want to be part of the wedding. Not just as a guest, but as like an actual part of it. Scarlett's eyes went bright with tears she was clearly trying to contain. I would be honored to have you as part of our wedding, if and when that happens. Okay then. Addison straightened her shoulders. I guess we're doing this. They spent the rest of the afternoon looking at real estate listings online. The three of them crowded around Evan's laptop, arguing about the merits of various neighborhoods and house styles. Addison had surprisingly strong opinions about kitchen layouts for someone who'd never cooked a meal in her life. Scarlett kept gravitating toward houses with dedicated office space until Evan gently reminded her that this was supposed to be about building work-life balance, not bringing the office home. By evening, they'd narrowed their search to a handful of possibilities, all in good school districts, all within reasonable distance of both Rowan Industries and Addison's current school. They scheduled viewings for the following weekend, making it a family activity complete with elaborate scoring sheets Addison insisted on creating. The first three houses they looked at were nice but wrong in ways that became obvious immediately. Too modern, too old, too far from the lake, too close to the highway. But the fourth house stopped all three of them in their tracks the moment they walked through the front door. It was a craftsman-style home in a quiet neighborhood, with hardwood floors and built-in bookshelves and windows that let in floods of natural light. The kitchen was spacious without being ostentatious, opening onto a deck that overlooked a small but well-maintained yard. Upstairs there were 4 bedrooms, one that would be perfect for Addison, one for Evan and Scarlett, one for an office, and one for guests or whatever the future might require. This one, Addison said decisively, standing in what would be her room. This is the one. Don't you want to see the rest of the houses on our list? Evan asked. Nope, this one feels right. She wasn't wrong. Walking through the house, Evan could see their life fitting into these spaces. Lazy Sunday mornings in the kitchen, Addison doing homework at the dining room table, evenings on the deck watching summer fade into fall. It felt like a home in a way his apartment never fully had, like a place where a family could grow rather than just survive. Scarlett found him in the backyard, standing by a small garden bed that looked like it had been loved once and could be loved again. Addison's right. This is the one. It's more expensive than we discussed. I can cover the difference. Scarlett, let me do this. She moved closer, taking his hand. Let me invest in our future. I have more money than I'll ever need, and I want to use it for something that matters, for building a home with the people I love. They made an offer that evening, slightly over asking because the market was competitive and neither of them wanted to risk losing what felt like exactly the right place. 3 days later, their offer was accepted. A month after that, they closed on the house and began the process of merging 3 separate lives into one shared space. The moving process revealed how differently they'd been living. Evan's possessions fit into a dozen boxes: clothes, books, Addison's things, and the carefully preserved remnants of Sarah that he'd been carrying through the years. Scarlett arrived with furniture Evan had only seen in her penthouse, expensive pieces that looked out of place in his apartment but fit perfectly in the new house. She also brought boxes of items she'd been storing: her mother's china, photo albums from her childhood, the accumulated evidence of a life lived mostly in private. They unpacked slowly, making decisions together about where things should go, what mattered, and what could be donated. Scarlett insisted on displaying photos of Sarah prominently, in the living room, in Addison's room, in the spaces where her absence would otherwise feel like erasure. She's part of this family, Scarlett said when Evan protested that it might be weird. Your past with her is part of what made you who you are, which is part of why I love you. We don't erase her to make room for me. We make room for all of it. Addison adjusted to the new house faster than Evan expected. She decorated her room with a mix of her old things and new purchases, creating a space that felt distinctly hers. She made friends with the neighbor kids within a week, discovered a love for gardening that surprised everyone, and slowly stopped referring to the house as the new place and started calling it home. Work continued to flourish. The AI platform launched to widespread acclaim, generating revenue that exceeded even Scarlett's optimistic projections. Evan's team received bonuses and recognition, and several major companies approached Rowan Industries about licensing the technology. The success was gratifying, but not surprising. They'd built something solid, something valuable, and the market had recognized it. What surprised Evan more was how seamlessly his professional and personal lives integrated. Scarlett remained his CEO at work, demanding and exacting, but she'd also become his partner at home, the person he planned weekends with and argued with about whose turn it was to do dishes. They'd found a balance that worked, clear boundaries that protected both relationships from contamination by the other. 6 months after moving into the house, on a Saturday morning when fall was just beginning to hint at its arrival, Evan woke to find Scarlett already up, sitting by the bedroom window with coffee and a distant expression. He recognized that look. She got it when she was processing something significant, working through some decision that required more than simple logic. "What's on your mind?" he asked, joining her by the window. "I've been thinking about stepping back from the CEO role." Whatever Evan had expected, it wasn't that. "What?" "Not entirely, not right away. But maybe transitioning to chair of the board, bringing in someone else to handle day-to-day operations. I've been doing this for 15 years, Evan, building and running and pushing and growing, and I'm tired. Not burned out exactly, but ready for something different." "What would you do instead?" "I don't know yet. That's the exciting part." She turned to look at him, and her face held a lightness he'd rarely seen. "Maybe I'd teach or mentor young entrepreneurs, or just be home more, be present for Addison's school stuff and our life together. I've spent so long defining myself by my work, and therapy has helped me realize that I'm more than my company. I'm allowed to want other things." "When would this happen?" "I'm thinking of announcing it next month, transitioning over 6 months. That gives me time to find the right successor, to make sure the company's in good hands." She reached for his hand. "What do you think?" "I think it's brave. I think it's probably the healthiest decision you could make. And I think I'm incredibly proud of you." "You don't think I'm giving up?" "I think you're choosing what matters most. That's not giving up. That's wisdom." Scarlett made the announcement the following month at a board meeting, and the news rippled through Rowan Industries like a controlled detonation. There was shock, speculation, and inevitable concerns about the company's future. But Scarlett handled it with her characteristic competence, outlining a succession plan that was thorough and sensible, making it clear that she wasn't abandoning the company but evolving her relationship with it. The transition took exactly 6 months, as planned. Scarlett's successor was a brilliant woman named Janet Liu, who'd been running operations for years and understood the company's culture intimately. On Scarlett's last official day as CEO, the company threw a celebration that was equal parts tribute and transition, honoring what she'd built while looking forward to what came next. That evening, Evan and Addison threw their own celebration at home. A quiet dinner with Monica and her husband Josh, with champagne for the adults and sparkling cider for Addison, with toasts and laughter and the comfortable chaos of people who'd become family by choice rather than blood. After everyone had left and Addison had gone to bed, Evan and Scarlett stood on their deck looking out at the yard where autumn leaves were just beginning to fall. The night was cool enough for sweaters, but not yet cold, holding that perfect balance between seasons. "I have something for you," Evan said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Scarlett looked at the box, then at him, her eyes widening with understanding. "Evan, I know we haven't talked about this explicitly, and I know we said we'd take things slow. But it's been a year since that night at the gala, and every single day since then has been better because you're in it." He opened the box, revealing a simple ring, elegant without being ostentatious, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. "Marry me, Scarlett. Make this family official. Let me spend the rest of my life loving you and Addison and whatever future we build together." Scarlett's hands went to her mouth, and tears were streaming down her face, and she was nodding before she could speak. "Yes. Yes. Of course, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she pulled him into a kiss that tasted like salt and joy and all the accumulated hope they'd been building together. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Scarlett laughed through her tears. "We should tell Addison. In the morning. Let's just have this moment first." They stood there in the cool night air, holding each other and looking at the house they'd chosen together, the life they'd built from the ruins of their separate loneliness. Inside, Addison slept safely, surrounded by photos of her mother and the love of her father and the steady presence of the woman who'd chosen to be part of their story. The next morning, they told Addison over breakfast. Her reaction was immediate and enthusiastic, jumping up from her cereal to hug them both, already planning what she'd wear to the wedding, insisting that she needed to be called the chief family officer rather than just a bridesmaid. "When's the wedding?" she demanded. "We haven't decided yet," Scarlett said, still getting used to the weight of the ring on her finger. "We wanted to make sure you were okay with it first." "I'm so okay with it. Can we have it in the backyard? And can I help plan everything? And can Maya be a bridesmaid too?" They let Addison's enthusiasm wash over them, already knowing that planning this wedding would be a family project, that every decision would be made together, that this was what family meant, not perfection, but choosing each other over and over again. The wedding, when it happened 6 months later, was exactly what they'd wanted. Small, intimate, held in their backyard with close friends and family bearing witness. Addison stood between them during the ceremony, holding both their hands, officially part of the union being formed. Monica cried through her reading, and Josh had to supply tissues. Patricia, who'd become a close friend to Scarlett over the years, gave a toast that was both funny and touching about watching Scarlett transform from the Ice Queen into someone capable of love. But the moment that mattered most to Evan came during his vows, when he looked at Scarlett and Addison and said, "I'm marrying both of you today. I'm promising to love you, support you, be present for you through whatever comes next. We're a family now, officially, and that means we face the world together." Scarlett's vows echoed his sentiment. "I'm not replacing anyone. I'm adding to something already beautiful. Addison, thank you for letting me into your life, into your family. I promise to honor your mother's memory, to support your dreams, and to love you as fiercely as any parent could. And Evan, thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away. Thank you for believing I could be more than my worst moment. Thank you for teaching me that love is worth the risk of pain." They were married at sunset, golden light filtering through the trees in their backyard, surrounded by the people who mattered most. When the officiant pronounced them married and Evan kissed his wife while his daughter cheered, it felt like the culmination of a journey that had started with one act of kindness at a corporate gala and had grown into something neither of them could have predicted. The reception was simple: good food, better company, dancing on the deck while string lights twinkled overhead. Addison danced with both her father and her new stepmother, laughing when Scarlett proved to be surprisingly terrible at following the beat. Monica pulled Evan aside at one point, tears in her eyes. "Sarah would be so happy for you," she said, "for all of you." "I hope so. I know so. She loved you enough to want you to live, not just survive. And that's what you're doing now. You're living." As the evening wound down and guests departed with hugs and well wishes, the three of them stood together in their yard, looking at the house that had become home, the family they'd built by choice and commitment and daily acts of love. "Well, Mrs. Carter," Evan said, pulling Scarlett close, "they'd decided she would take his name, a choice that had surprised some people but felt right to both of them, a symbol of building something new while honoring what came before." "Well, Mr. Carter," she replied, grinning, "what now?" "Now we live happily ever after," Addison announced, inserting herself between them. "Duh. That's how all good stories end." "Not happily ever after," Evan corrected gently. "Just happily. One day at a time, building something good, making choices that matter." "Okay, fine. Happily one day at a time." Addison looked between them. "But still pretty perfect, right?" "Pretty perfect," Scarlett agreed, and Evan nodded, and they stood there together as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars began to emerge. There would be challenges ahead. There always were. Moments of doubt, conflicts to navigate, the ordinary difficulties of merging lives and raising a child and building a marriage. But they'd face those challenges together, as a family, with the foundation of trust and honesty and genuine love they'd spent the past year and a half constructing. Evan thought back to that night at the gala, to the moment when everyone else had looked away and he'd chosen to step forward. One small choice, made because it was right rather than easy, had cascaded into everything that came after. It had taught him that patterns could change, that grief didn't have to be forever, that taking risks on people was how you built lives worth living. Scarlett had been transformed too. From the lonely CEO drowning her isolation in champagne to this woman standing beside him, no longer hiding behind professional armor, allowing herself to be vulnerable and loved. She'd learned that power without connection was hollow, that success without someone to share it with was just another form of failure, that building a family required more courage than building an empire. And Addison, watching both of them, learning from their example what love looked like after loss, what family meant when you chose it rather than just inherited it, what it meant to be brave enough to let new people into your heart, even when you were scared they might leave. They went inside eventually, tired but happy, ready to begin their life as an official family. Upstairs, in the room they'd prepared for this purpose, was a photo they'd commissioned, all three of them together, smiling, with Sarah's portrait carefully placed beside them on the table, not erased, not forgotten, but honored as part of the story that had brought them here. Before they turned off the lights, Evan paused to look at that photo one more time. Sarah smiled back at him from the portrait, frozen at 32 forever, and he sent a silent thank you into the universe for the life they'd shared and the daughter they'd created. Then he looked at Scarlett, already in bed and waiting for him, and at Addison's closed door where their daughter slept safely, and he felt the fullness of gratitude for everything he'd thought was lost forever, but had found again in unexpected form. He'd learned that the end of one story could be the beginning of another, that love didn't diminish by being shared but multiplied, that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was refuse to look away when everyone else did, because in that moment of seeing and being seen, everything could change. He turned off the light and climbed into bed beside his wife, and together they drifted towards sleep in the house they'd chosen, in the life they'd built, in the family they'd become through 1,000 small choices to keep showing up for each other. Outside, Chicago continued its endless movement, millions of lives intersecting and diverging in patterns too complex to predict. But inside this house, the pattern was clear and simple and true. Three people who'd found each other against long odds, who'd chosen to build something beautiful from the fragments of their separate brokenness, who'd proven that sometimes the most remarkable transformations begin with the smallest acts of kindness. And if that wasn't a happy ending, Evan thought as sleep finally claimed him, then he didn't know what was.